Hey there, welcome back to QuickBooks Desktop 2022. My name is Cindy and we are working through Module 3 where we've been looking at different ways to customize the QuickBooks environment. We just finished looking at the very first video, which is part 1 of the preferences. I want to go ahead and continue that now and just take up where we left off after part 1. If you got out of the preferences window, you can go back to it by clicking on Edit from the menu and coming down to Preferences. Let's go ahead and start where we left off after part 1. We're going to actually click on the left where it says Reports and Graphs. There's one thing in particular that I really want to point out here, and that's under the Company Preferences tab. When you run reports in QuickBooks, they're automatically run on an accrual basis. You can choose to run them on a cash basis. Now we'll talk more about reports in Module 11, but just to tell you what this means, when a report is run on an accrual basis, that means when you're looking at your income, that number would include any invoices you created that have not yet been paid. Also, as far as expenses go, if you've entered any bills that you haven't yet paid, they would show up in this report as well as expenses. Versus if you use the cash option, it's only going to show invoices you've actually received money for that you've been paid for. And it's also only going to show expenses that you actually spent the money for already. And that's going to be the difference. You'll see when you're on a report, you can also change it as a one-time thing there. But just know that your reports are automatically run on an accrual basis. You can see there are other options here as well that you might want to look at as far as reports are concerned. Let's go down to Sales and Customers on the left and talk about a few things here. I'm going to the My Preferences tab. One thing I want to point out is there is an option to prompt for time/cost to add. There's an option in QuickBooks that we're going to talk about in a later module that will let you take any expenses you've accumulated that might go towards a job you're working on, and you can actually pull those expenses into an invoice, and that way you can get reimbursed from your customer. Now, if you want QuickBooks to prompt you for those, you can choose this option here to do that. Under the Company Preferences tab, there are a few things that you might want to look at. For example, if you create sales forms, which we'll talk about in a later module, you might have a particular shipping method that you like to use automatically. You can choose options like that. Let's go look at sales tax. If your company collects sales tax from your customers, you'll want to set up those sales tax items. Now you can do that here, but we're going to talk later when we look at the items list at how to set them up there, because you'll have several different ones you'll want to set up and you need to make sure you do it the correct way. But here you can tell QuickBooks that you do charge sales tax or you don't. And then you can also choose your most common sales tax if you've already set it up. If you haven't set it up yet, then you're going to need to wait until you get it set up before you can choose your most common sales tax here. This little section here, what will happen is if you've had items that are taxable and some that are non-taxable, you're going to see that you can have this code right here that says tax, or you can create a new one. And the same thing for non-taxable. I usually just leave those, but some people prefer to have different wording for those, and you can set that up. Also, items that are taxable will have a T all the way to the right of that line item. When we get into the invoicing section, you'll see more about how that works. Let's go down on the left and look real quick at Send Forms. You have the ability in QuickBooks to send a form, and an example of that would be an invoice. You create an invoice, and instead of printing it out and mailing it, you can actually send it right from QuickBooks. If you do that, there's going to be a default template that goes with that. You can see they've got one already set up here called Basic Invoice. I'll just edit to show you what that looks like. You can see here it would have the customer's name. It's going to have the invoice number. Thank you for your business. You can see this. If you want to edit this, you can do this right here so that it pulls the new template. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. You can also add a new one if you want. In this particular window, you'll see it's not just for invoices. There are other forms as well. There's credit memos, there are pay stubs, and if you want to edit any of those or create a new one, you can do it right from here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit on the left here, and we see a couple more. I want to look at spelling. If you've made a change to your send forms preferences, you'll want to go ahead and say yes here. I didn't make any changes, but I'll go ahead and say yes anyway. Now under spelling here on the left, I'm going back to the My Preferences tab. You'll see that it will always check your spelling before it prints or sends any forms. It's a very good idea to spell check any forms that you sent out so that you look professional, but if you don't want that, you can uncheck that. There are also some options down here for 1099s. You'll want to click on the Company Preferences tab. Here's where it just asks you, do you file 1099 forms, yes or no? And then one last thing I'll mention on the left under Time and Expenses. You have an option in QuickBooks to track your time. Now there are a couple of different ways that can be used. It could be if you're in a business where you invoice your customers based on the time you spend working on their projects, then you can turn on a timer in QuickBooks and have it track that time for you and then pull it into an invoice. It could be that you're just trying to track the time that your subcontractors worked on a job or your employees. So you could turn that option on here if it's not on, and also look at the first day of your work week. It's currently set to Monday, but you can choose Sunday through Saturday. That's really the most important options that I think you're going to work with here in QuickBooks. You might want to take time and look through the other ones. Just go through it any time and go ahead and make these changes. And once you've made those, go ahead and click OK. And now you've finished the preferences. Now that we've looked at all of the preferences in QuickBooks, let's go ahead and move over to video number 3 and talk about how to work with different users in QuickBooks.